Hello and welcome to today's video. My name is Promise. I'm a senior front-end developer at ShortPoint. And today I'm going to be talking to you about everything web accessibility. And we are going to go through everything that you need to know on this topic. So first of all, I think it's very useful for us to go over, to see an overview of everything that we're going to be discussing today. First of all, we are going to talk about what is web accessibility. Then after that, we are going to look at why accessibility is important in the world today. Then we are going to look at the history of web accessibility. I believe this is important to talk about before we see the current state of web accessibility. The fifth thing that we're going to go over is making the web more accessible. In this aspect, we're going to talk about what individuals and businesses need to do, what they need to do to make their websites and web pages accessible. And the last thing that we're going to discuss is accessibility devices, tools, and resources. We are going to look at some websites that you can use to keep up to date after this, if you are interested in keeping up to date with web accessibility in general. So the first thing that I want to go over before looking at the other important aspects in web accessibility is we want to define what exactly web accessibility is. And put simply, web accessibility means that people with disability can use the web. Basically, a good way to think about this is when you look at sports in general, not everyone is able to experience sports in a stadium, but anybody can experience sports on their digital devices. So this is very similar to getting the experience of people that are in the stadium. So basically what web accessibility is trying to do is it's trying to make the web accessible to people with disability so that they can use the web and they can do everything that people without disability can do on the web. And so this is basically all that web accessibility entails. And in the corner of the screen, I've added some common disabilities that web accessibility tries to address. And there are three very common ones, which is blindness or low vision, physical disability, and cognitive and sensory disabilities. So it's important to state here that blindness doesn't refer to people that are totally blind. They can either be totally blind or partially blind. And also, it's good to understand what we mean by using the web. This means that we want users with disability, whether they're blind or they have some kind of limited mobility, we want them to be able to, for example, host this, to make a video like this, or to be able to watch and listen to a video like this. So someone with some disability like deafness obviously will not be able to listen to audio, or want to be able to, for example, provide a transcript for them to read. So what makes up the web? This is everything that you can think of on the web, which is web pages, web advertisements, videos, PDFs, documents, basically anything you can interact with on the web. We want people with disability to also be able to interact with it and have a similar experience. So I thought it's a good idea to show you what it's like for someone with limited mobility to using the web. As you can see in this short animation, this short video, this user is not using a mouse, he's using a mouse stick and a keyboard to type. So it's important to always have this in mind as web users or as designers or as developers, to have this at the back of our mind and not to build interfaces just for mouse or for people without disability. And this is also a similar video. This is someone with some injury using the keyboard only to interact with the web. So the next thing we want to talk about is why exactly is web accessibility important? Why should we care about web accessibility? And the most important thing to consider is that a lot of people in the world today are living with some form of disability or the other. Precisely about 15% of the world population has some form of disability. And what this means is that over 1 billion people live with some form of disability. Out of that 1 billion, about 4% of the world population, which is about over 200 million people, live with some form of visual disability. And this is 1 out of every 25 people. Saying that disability affects like a large part of the population of the world today, and the web is a very important aspect of our lives. A lot of countries have come up with legislations to force and to promote web accessibility among individuals and companies. Out of which, we have currently about documented 42 countries that have legislations out of the 195 countries in the world today. And for concerning legislations, the Section 508 legislation is actually one of the most important ones in the world. It's a legislation in the USA. And basically what this legislation is trying to do is trying to mandate and require all federal agencies in the USA to make their ICT platforms, which is their web pages, their web applications, and any other kind of user interface that is connected to the internet, to make it accessible to users and their employees. So what this means is that if as a business or as an individual, you are rendering some kind of service to a federal agency in the USA, you are also required to make your ICT facilities accessible to everyone and not just users without disability. So the next thing I think is important to always understand where we are coming from in whatever topic that we're discussing. And so I have a small timeline of the most important events in web accessibility. So one of the most important events in web in general, of course, is that the first website was launched in 1991. I have a screenshot of that website on the right side of this slide, as you can see. Basically, it's a simple website, and this website is fully accessible. It has been accessible right from the day that it was published. You can interact with it using a screen reader or a keyboard. I'm going to explain exactly what the screen reader is when we are talking about the current state of web accessibility. So one other thing that I want to point out that I think is important is to note that the concept of accessibility itself is such an important topic that it predates the web itself. That is, it exists even before the first website was published. So if you look at the timeline that I have on the left, in 1989, the JAWS screen reader, which is one of the most popular screen readers today, was published for Windows. It's only available for the Windows platform, but it was published 2 years before the first website was published. And also I have a list of I also try to point out when the important Section 508 legislation was enacted in 1998. And also one other important thing I want to point out is the WCAG, which stands for the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. What this is it's like you can think of it of like a list of standards that whoever is trying to make their web page or website accessible can comply to. It basically makes it easy because the definition of web accessibility is very broad. So the W3C, which is the body that is responsible for the standards. So the W3C is basically a group. They create standards for all web technology. which is the standards that all browsers and screen readers use and adhere to. So they created a guideline for web accessibility so that it's easier for us as individuals and maybe as businesses to be able to make our websites and web pages accessible to people without accessibility. So basically what this is it's a page on the web which is freely accessible to anyone and everyone. And I'm going to show you what this looks like. So this is the web, the W3C Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. It's quite a large page, or you can also think of it as a document. And it has all of the table of contents which you can click through and read. Because this is a very big document, there's a summarized version which I'm going to talk about later. So now in 2008, the version 2, which is of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines was published. And I thought it is important to bring this up because this is the guideline that most of the legislations use around the world. This is the guidelines that they use. So this makes it easier, for example, as a business, as I said, to comply with, for example, this Section 508 legislation. So basically, the accessibility is such a very broad topic. We want to make the web accessible to people with disabilities. But what exactly do we mean? So the guidelines make it very easy, and the legislations use this guideline, which means that if you want to comply, for example, with the Section 508 legislation, you simply have to comply with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So I also thought it would be very good to give us an example of a WCAG guideline. So if you look at the bottom corner of the screen, I have here one of the guidelines. It's like a summary of one of the guidelines that says that all content, all not text content on the web should have a text alternative that serves the equivalent purpose. So what this means basically is that, for example, if I have this screenshot that I have here on a blog or on a personal page, someone that is using a screen reader or some other type of device might not be able to see. For example, someone that is blind obviously cannot see this screenshot. But what we want to do is we want to add alternative text that describes what the image is, so that when a screen reader, for example, is reading out the content of the page, it can tell the user that there's an image on the page, and it can also tell the user what the image is about. And so now we get to the state of web accessibility as it is right now. And this is important to discuss, obviously, because we want to know what is the standards, like how do we measure web accessibility? We've defined what web accessibility is, but how do we exactly know if our website is accessible? Because there are like a million things that we can point at. So like I said, the WCAG is the de facto standard for measuring web accessibility. And the W3C, which is the group responsible for maintaining and creating the WCAG guideline, they made it easy for businesses and individuals to comply with the guidelines in stages. So instead of making our websites or our web pages compliant at random, there's something called levels. Basically, these levels are groups of guidelines that a business can, for example, comply with according to their needs or according to their capability. So basically what this means is there are 3 different levels currently published by the W3C. And the levels are level A, level AA, and level AAA. So what uh, this is that the lowest level is the level A, and this affords businesses and individuals the convenience of complying to the levels that meet their needs or that they are able to. Level A is the lowest of the three levels, and level AA is the mid level. So as a business or as an individual, if our website or our web content is compliant with level AA, it is also automatically compliant with most of the legislations that exist in the world today. So if a website is compliant with level AA, it is automatically compliant with Section 508 of the United States. And also, we now know what the standards are, and it's important to also know some tools that are useful for measuring and testing. So the three most common tools are like this screen reader, the switching, there's something called switch access, which I'm going to show to you. So this is what the switch access is. It's this little button that I have at the left side of the page. And basically, what it is just a simple button which allows users with limited mobility, for example, to be able to use to type or to interact with the web pages or something. And the way a switch works is when a piece of software is reading out the content of the page, a user can click the switch. For example, if a screen reader, for example, is reading the content of the page, the user can use a switch, can just click the switch, and they will get a context menu of what they would like to do. So for example, if a screen reader is reading a link, I can click the switch and I will be asked what I would like to do next. For example, if I would like to open the link, or I'd like to copy the link text, or I would like to copy the actual link. And the screen reader, it's actually quite straightforward. A screen reader is just a piece of software that reads out the content of any web page or user interface. So, and then lastly, we have the keyboard. Like I showed in the short videos that we saw earlier, it's very possible for users to use the web only with keyboard and not a mouse, and without a mouse. Also, I thought it would be a good idea to talk about some common issues in web accessibility today. And one of the most common issues is low text contrast. This one is very common around the web, and I have a screenshot that illustrates just what I mean. So as you can see in this screenshot, this is a screenshot of an actual web page that uses a very light gray text on a white background. This is visible to some people with very good vision or eyesight, but for a very large percentage of the world population, this would be barely visible. And also I have some other common issues that I've listed. Alternate text is an issue that's already described. So we want to have alternate text for all media contents. For example, if you had a video, we want to have a transcript for it for users that have some kind of visual impairment. So the next thing, after talking about the state of web accessibility, understanding the history of web accessibility is, okay, if we know what the issues are, like how do we now go about fixing them? How do we make the web more accessible? So as a business that has an existing web application or an existing web page, basically we want to do an audit against the WCAG level AA guidelines. So what this means is we want to test our web page or website or web application, whatever it is that we have on the web. We want to test it against the guidelines. We want to use screen readers. We want to use switch access, like switch device that I discussed, and keyboards to make sure that our website or our web page passes all of the requirements and guidelines from the W3C. After this, we want to go to the next phase, which is fixing all of the issues that we might have identified. This usually requires some kind of development on the software side. And after this, we do a reevaluation. And if there are any issues, we go back to fix and reevaluate again. And for new web pages and new applications, it's basically we just want to have it in mind that web accessibility is important. It is much more cheaper to work on accessibility while we are designing and building new applications for the web. And last but not the least is the accessibility devices and some tools and resources. So for the devices, the most popular device is the switch access. And in the video that I showed earlier, we can also see that there's a device called the mouse stick, which users can also use to interact with the web. And in the tools aspect, the most common are the screen readers. These are very useful to not just the people with disability. This is useful to people without disability in case, for example, you want to listen to a very long article rather than reading yourself. Or for example, for people with disability, using screen readers is also very useful for testing. And in the resources, I've gone over some of like the WCAG. I already touched on the WCAG guidelines. For this section 508, this is accessible. It's on the web. It's accessible to anyone and everyone. And for anyone that would like to keep up to date, there is a very good resource created by a group of designers and developers, which has a lot more. So this is the resource, and it's very useful for keeping up to date with accessibility. It contains a much more detailed list of software and tools. Some of these tools I've already tried to explain. The JAWS being a Windows-only device that is paid for and is the most popular currently. And the VoiceOver is actually a free tool that is bundled with macOS and iOS. So it's made by Apple themselves, and it's a free software, and it's available on all iOS and Apple devices. And the last is the last resource is this checklist. So the reason for this is the WCAG guideline itself is a very large guideline. It's a very large document or website. And this company called WebAIM have tried to summarize most of it. So it's you don't necessarily have to go through the entire guidelines to get a good understanding of everything that is, of all of the guidelines that is currently published as part of the WCAG guidelines. So it's actually not advisable to, this is useful just for quick read through or scanning. It's not advisable to use this as a standard because this might not be updated as frequently as the guidelines itself would be. So this is most of what we wanted to talk about for web accessibility. And I believe this is all of the important aspects of accessibility that everyone needs to understand. And so if you have watched this video through my talk, I'd like to thank you very much and hope that you've learned a lot from the video.